Grald stood before the doors, silently contemplating the moment. His life was on the brink of irreversible change, yet he felt an unexpected calm. His fingers traced the intricate design on his uniform cuff's ornate button, briefly considering tossing it aside. But no, he decided he would first attempt to reason and speak his mind. When the doors opened, the guard pulled on the leash attached to his shackles. As he was led down the aisle past the full House of Parliament, he saw the cameras. They want to make a spectacle out of me as an example. They will regret that, he thought, smiling. When he reached the small podium in front of the Prime Minister's dais, he did not bow as was customary. The gasps filled the room. The sergeant-at-arms stood from his seat next to the Prime Minister and unrolled an official scroll and began to read the charges. General Grald, you have been brought here this day to answer for the crimes of treason and sedition against the Galactic Federation. You are charged with treason for knowingly and with malice aiding the enemies of this Federation by supplying the humans with classified intelligence concerning the capabilities and disposition of the fleet. You are further charged with sedition for publicly denying the legitimacy of this Parliament and sowing rebellion. The Minister of Justice will now present the evidence of these crimes. The sergeant-at-arms took his seat, and the Minister of Justice and several aides came forward from the gallery to the table on Grald's left. They began putting their evidence against him on the large holoscreen. Grald did his best to appear disinterested throughout this. He found it almost impossible to not smile when they played his address he had given over the military emergency broadcasting system. He feigned boredom as they tried to show his pattern of seditiousness they had uncovered going back to his days as a recruit at the academy. They are laying it on thick, he mused as he looked at the beautiful tapestries on the walls and the gold leaf trim on the railings. When the Minister of Justice rested his case, the Prime Minister took several minutes looking over his notes before speaking. General Grald, I am to understand that you have chosen to represent yourself in these matters? Yes, Grald responded, not using any of the customary formalities. Gasps at his rudeness filling the room again. The Prime Minister waved his hand for silence, then nodded to his attendant. The screen on the podium in front of Grald lit up, showing a few of the files he requested. He wasn't surprised in the least, he had expected as much. He had cleverly mislabeled what he needed and filed it with data pertaining to scientific studies his crew had performed. The Prime Minister, being a shrewd politician, reciprocated Grald's informality. Very well, Grald, make your case. All of the documents you requested that were not deemed sensitive to security are available to you. Grald made a show looking through the files before he looked up at the Prime Minister, barely refraining from grinning. Interesting that my request for the Minister of Justice's disciplinary reports from his primary school were deemed too sensitive for the security of the Federation. The gallery erupted in laughter. The Minister of Justice leaped to his feet and started to object but stopped, forgetting to close his mouth for several seconds when the Prime Minister waved him off. The Prime Minister took his time assessing Grald before leaning forward to speak. Enough, General. You will not make a mockery out of these proceedings. I honestly doubt I could, Grald responded in an even tone. General Grald, the fact I find your humor mildly amusing does not mean I will suffer your insolence much further. The Prime Minister replied in a deceptively calm voice. Grald could see the anger brewing in his eyes. Proceed and choose your words with more care. Grald contemptuously gave a shallow bow and pulled himself up to full height. He waved the video of his address up onto the holoscreen but did not play it. It almost looked like a portrait, the way he was seated with his back straight and his hands clasped in front of him on the desk, the medals on his uniform gleaming in the lights from the camera. Yes, that will serve, he thought to himself. I stand by what I said in this address to our citizens. Not only do I stand by it, I consider it the single most patriotic act I have ever committed. When you sent me to the humans, I knew of the invasion plans already being put in motion. I was fully aware of this body government's desire to enslave yet another lesser race to increase the depth of gold in the coffers. I knew I was meant to gather first-hand knowledge of the humans while pretending to be an ambassador of peace. When I arrived among the humans, it was made clear to me by their leaders they very well knew this also. They know this because they are already here watching us, probing our... I will not hear these lies, shouted the Minister of Defense. springing to his feet and slamming his hand on the railing that divided the council seats from the gallery. The humans have no FTL capability. They possess no fleet. Barely even enough cargo vessels to service their pitiful handful of colony worlds. The gallery and the representatives of the commons erupted in heated disputes, with several people yelling, "Let him speak." It took the Prime Minister several stomps of his foot on the dais floor to quiet the chamber. Grald did not give anyone else a chance to speak, turning to the Minister of Defense to make his reply. "Minister, I understand you are a simple soldier, the same as me, who rose up through the ranks to your lofty position. I understand why you cannot fathom a battlespace without fleets to move around the table in your war room. The humans simply do not need a fleet of FTL ships. They are capable of going wherever they please in an instant. General, that is enough," the Prime Minister bellowed, rising to his feet. "I will not tolerate you fear-mongering with stories of wizardry. Speak a word more of this and I will pass sentence and have you dragged from these chambers. Will you make a mockery of justice then, Prime Minister? Or will you honor my right to speak freely in my own defense? Do I no longer have the right of every citizen because my words do not please you and this council?" Grald turned to face the gallery as he said this, then slowly turning back to the Prime Minister, who was still standing, shaking with rage. The entire Parliament were on their feet, arguing and shouting over each other as Grald and the Prime Minister stood quiet, staring at each other. Several members of the representatives of the Commons were demanding to speak on the record. Several of the council ministers were calling for the Prime Minister to pass judgment. Silence. The Prime Minister's voice cut through the din like a knife. Realizing he had lost, the Prime Minister made a show of returning to his seat with all of the dignity he could muster. "No, General, you shall have your say, as we would suffer from any lunatic or demented old mother. You will, however, be expected to present evidence for any claim you make. A task that would be much easier to accomplish if that evidence wasn't considered sensitive to security. No worries, I still have what I need." Low whispers could be heard throughout the chamber at this last statement from Grald. He turned to face the Minister of Defense again. "Minister, you are correct, the humans have no FTL fleet. The vessels you mistake for sublight cargo ships are research vessels and attack craft. As for the number of human colony worlds, I would not call 582 systems a sad few." Grald shuffled sideways so he could reach the podium with his shackled arm, still looking at the council. He pulled up a map of the galaxy on the holoscreen. He then overlaid it with the data from one of his files that showed the 9 colonies clustered close around the Terra system. Then he pinched in the scale to include the dwarf galaxies with the rest of the red dots showing the locations of human colonies. The Minister of Defense rose to his feet, leaning closer to the screen, then spoke. "That is impossible. You expect us to believe on your word, the word of a traitor, that a species with no FTL capability is an intergalactic empire. I have looked through your data and your claims and have seen no proof of what you are saying. I have questioned your crew and they verify your claims out of a sense of duty to their superior officer. Or possibly a drug-induced mass hallucination." Grald nodded his head as he sifted through a few folders on the screen. He brought up a picture of his ship taken from a station orbiting a human colony. Yes, you went through this information just enough to dismiss it. But you never studied these pictures well enough to notice the constellations in the background." Grald punched in the request for the cloud to analyze the picture and display the location on the map on a split screen. The screen showed key stars in the picture marked in blue with the corresponding stars on the map marked in blue as well. A red dot showed up next to a red dwarf star in the smaller dwarf galaxy with a yellow bearing line indicating the direction of the camera. "Tell me, Minister, is your 100 billion credit AI hallucinating? I have been to these places myself and the trip took less time than it would for you to waddle down this aisle and out of those doors. Might I also correct you, the humans do have a few interstellar FTL ships in museums." The murmuring grew so loud that the Prime Minister stomped his foot again for silence. He rose and walked to the screen. After looking at it for a moment, he waved the images away and returned to his seat. He smoothed his robes on his lap with great care. "General Grald, this is not evidence, it is trickery. I do not know how it was accomplished, but I have had every great mind of science analyzing your reports, and they all say you did not have the time nor did you use enough fuel to have made this trip. The claims you make are, according to them, impossible. These wormholes, as you call them, are simply impossible. Is this the extent of the evidence you claim to have access to? No, I have more. I will not bore you with the explanation of what a worm is. That is simply the human term for this technology and does not actually explain it very well. What they are doing is folding spacetime until the points they want align and then open a portal between them. They can create portals large enough for an entire fleet to pass through or small enough for a person, using a device the size of 1 credit palladium coin. I can show you one of these portals. Gerald waved up the holoscreen again and put another video up on it. The video showed a long-range scan of a planet from a human spy drone with all of the sensor data displayed in Terran Standard. I apologize, this is quite long, I will speed it up. What you are seeing is human intel on the homeworld of the last species that tried to conquer them. Humans refer to them as Shethils. Oh, did you see the orb? That is the weapon they used. I would slow that part down to real time, but it isn't anything special, just a smallish silver orb, and you can't see the portal it opened against the black of space. The video played for several more seconds before anything happened. Then slowly the planet started to deform, opening glowing cracks of magma. A second later, an inky black spot opened in the surface and the pieces of the now disintegrating planet started orbiting it in a disk with a razor-sharp inner edge of white light. The murmuring started again, members of the parliament busily discussing what they were seeing but not looking away from the screen. The Minister of Defense got up and walked over to it before turning to Gerald. What is this? It's labeled as a natural disaster. Gerald, no lounger caring, laughed out loud. Yes, I mislabeled it so you wouldn't bother looking closer. If you haven't figured it out yet, Minister, I knew exactly what this body government's reaction would be to the intelligence I gathered for you. That, Minister, is what happens when you make humans angry. They use a wormhole to send a device deep into the liquid mantle of your planet that opens another wormhole from there into a supermassive black hole. I warned you, General. The Prime Minister bellowed, straining his voice. He waved away the holoscreen again. I told you that you must present evidence of any claim, that I would not tolerate fear-mongering with stories of wizardry. I find you guilty of all charges and sentence you to death. Sentence to be carried out immediately. I expected no less of you. I will, as is my right, say my last words now. With all haste, General. Gerald nodded and turned to face the Parliament. My dear souls, what you do now is no longer up to me. The message I gave from the humans in my address was sincere. They do not wish for war. If we had gone to them honestly and peacefully, they would have traded with us and shared their technology with us to uplift us to the bounty of a post-scarcity society. They, however, will never give this technology to our citizens as long as this body government maintains its greedy grip on our society. You have seen the cost of war with the humans. With everything you know of me, do you honestly believe I would bear false witness and conspire with an enemy against my own people and loved ones? With that, Gerald shuffled back around to face the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, for you I have one more piece of evidence, and I pray it might check your hubris. I will give you some time to ponder it before we speak again. No, don't say anything. I have no intention of being murdered by fools today. With that, Gerald removed the false button from his cuff, squeezed it, and let it fall to the floor. As the portal materialized, he leaped through it, disappearing into its inky darkness as if by magic. Moments later, the portal snapped shut, and the device self-destructed with a small, resonant pop that echoed through the stunned silence of the chamber.